And whilst we allow everybody to come in, what I shall do is go and share this intro screen. Good evening, everybody. I'm Andrew Roberts from the Great Property Meet, and welcome everybody to what will be tonight's fantastic event. We have three amazing speakers lined up for you. We have the phenomenal, fantastic Mr. J. Howard. We have the brilliant, on the disc, DJ David Clouter, and a special mystery guest who we'll reveal later this evening. So, what do we have in store? Firstly, we'd like to say thank you very much to our sponsors, Property 118, YPN Magazine, and Property Investor News Magazine, along with Hope Property Finance, Amjam Design, and Newman Property Experts. Thank you all for your support. Now, we have a brilliant evening lined up where we are talking about how our experts have prepared for the exit and the lifting of lockdown now that estate agents are getting back to work. Auctions have continued to trade during this closed down period, and we have a lot of time for you to post your questions. So we're streaming this live via YouTube, and there is a comments box below. So if you put your questions in as we're doing the various talks, what we will do is pick those up in the Q&A session after the three short talks that we will deliver to you. Now, what I would first like to do is introduce our first speaker of the evening. our first speaker for the evening is Jay Howard. Now, Jay has been investing since he was 17 years old. Now, that's an amazing feat to have been investing for so long. And he has a penchant for dealing flats, houses with short leases, commercial deals. He did a talk for us around this time last year at the Great Property Meet, and we were outside in the 72 acres of ground. And in that talk, he shared with us a phenomenal deal that he purchased for 500,000 and 18 months later sold for over £5 million. He's also released a really great best-selling book. It's also here on the banner behind us, which is called Before the Hammer Falls. And he and Piotr co-authored that book. And what a fantastic book that is as well. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jay Howard to share with us where he sees the next 12 months and what he's been doing to prepare his business for this uplifting of the lockdown. So thank you very much, Jay. I'd like to hand over to you at this point.
Well, thank you for such a laudable introduction. That was lovely of you. Thank you very much. I don't know how much of that is deserving, but it was an absolute pleasure to come and speak at the Great Property Meet. It was the first time I'd done that talk without any slides, so that was purely from memory, which was a challenge and a pleasure. I think this may not be what everyone wants to hear, but I think for me going forward, I am doing exceedingly very little to change what we've been doing for the last 2 years as to what we'll be doing for the next 2 years. The reason for, we're introducing several other elements to what we would normally be doing, but in terms of the core business, there's no real change there. Our main source of market is the auctions, and I think people are banding about the word pivoting, but the auctions adapted. They followed the great Darwinistic approach of adapt or die, and they adapted really very quickly. So a lot of the in-room auctions went through massive genesis from either doing hybrid, which is where the auctioneer is approaching you visually as you would be in this environment, and allowing bids from the online bidders, telephone bidders, and proxy bidders. Some other auctioneers have decided to go fully online. And what that does is it enables them, it gives them the opportunity to operate very much unrestricted in this marketplace. Now, that's not to say that it's been entirely successful. There are some auctioneers that have done well and some auctioneers that have struggled. By and large, the first auction was quite successful, which was, I think, the March-April auctions were really quite successful. The May auction saw a massive reduction across the board, with the exception of one auctioneer. And those auctioneers were offering at least, if not half, a third of what they would normally be offering, and normally having about a third or half of their normal catalogue size. The one exception being Bard and Marcus, who still has 220 to 250 odd lots, but spread over 2 days instead of the 1 day. So you can see there's a massive reduction, not in confidence with the auction companies, but in vendor confidence in sale. I think the auction that is coming up tomorrow, which I'm kind of really looking out for, is going to be the Allsops commercial auction. I think that's really going to set the tone. But if I would just share with you an email I received today. So I'm on quite a lot of mailing lists. I know there's probably people out there that hate a mailing list, but when you're getting information from a reliable source, a mailing list is phenomenal value. So let me see if I can share the screen with it. I think I can. Here we go. So here it is. This is the April 2020 market snapshot from Allsop Commercial. And in this, as you can see here, this is the email here. This is their transaction update. So April transaction volume is 822 million, which is down 79%. April transactions 96 is down 56%. Average lot size is 8.56 million, which is down 120%. There you see the breakdown, the percentage share of April transactions. So offices are 15% of that. Industrial have shot up for obvious reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of fear around the future of the high street, and I think people are looking at industrial spaces in terms of, one thing that this current market has pointed out for people is that your ability to move product from A to B and have a good supply chain is massively important. So I think there's a good bandwagon for people to jump onto there for industrial. Retail, no surprise, is only 10% of that. Leisure, again, no surprise, because obviously leisure and hospitality tend to be mixed in with each other, and there's not really a growing market at the moment, at least for this quarter by and large. And mixed use is still faring quite nicely because there's quite a lot of permitted development opportunities and a couple of other opportunities in terms of blended income, etc., etc. So if you have a look here, retail volume is down 91%, leisure 70%, industrial surprisingly is down, but by the lowest margin. So I will stop share there. Just to give you a snapshot of what one of the largest commercial agents nationally, and obviously have a large international presence, that's their data, that's what they're seeing. So how does that impact me and what I'm planning on doing? So there's a couple of things that we're doing. We have our standard consultancy that we're working on, which is not going to change. I think a lot of people find auctions and trading quite difficult to kind of grasp or de-risk or manage in any way, shape or form. So hopefully we're filling in a viable gap there for people. We have started providing due diligence reports for people who are approaching auction properties and aren't quite sure about how the legal pack works or what kind of options they have with specific properties. So again, kind of filling in a bit of a niche. But again, auctions are fairly niche-like. We are also starting up an auction buyers club or a little group, and we're basically going to just investigate and go through auction catalogues on a one-by-one basis with a select group of people. I think that's going to be a really interesting dynamic. So it's not like a mentorship, it's not education, it's actual practical, going through auctions on a monthly basis, going through legal packs, having a look and running the numbers on certain lots, really getting in behind the scenes and hoping that at the end of that process, someone or some people will have a greater understanding, knowledge and accessibility for the auctions. In terms of our investing, we're going to continue to trade. There are several reasons for us to do that. So generally we trade auction in and auction out. So when we say auction in, that means buying the property in from an auction, and auction out normally means selling the property out through auction. We obviously do vary that via buying through commercial agents and then adding value or re-gearing and then selling through the auction, or vice versa. So we try and stay very, very fluid throughout the process. I think there's a sweet spot in this market. I think if you're looking to flip, so, technically maybe not even owning the property, but securing a contract, adding your 20% and then selling it on to somebody else, or hoping to and doing it on a conditional exchange, or maybe an assisted sale or a short option. I think those are risky environments to be playing in at the moment, obviously depending on how short those agreements are in place for. But I think trading is good. Our standard trade level is anywhere between 6 and 9 months. So we take a very malleable approach to the market. And because we try and buy at a discount of value, so not a below market value, but a discount of value. So there may be things affecting the property, whether it's structural, whether it's the quality of tenant, whether it's the fact it's been mismanaged or poorly handled in terms of an asset. We kind of go into those, we solve those problems, add that value. And we're looking at adding, the property that we're selling. This is a good case study. So we bought something in October of last year, 4 workshops. In that time, we got permitted development use for change of use to 4 houses, so 4 one-bedroom use houses. And now we're selling that in an auction in June, so that'll be in the McHugh's auction. And we had that revalued at more than 3 times the price that we had paid for it, because not only the permitted development, but the other angles that we implemented to improving the site and the asset itself. And that's really very important for us, because if property prices do drop, and I think anywhere between 10 to 15% from where we are, or from where we were about 3 or 4 months ago, 3 months ago maybe, I think we are able to manage to mitigate any real loss of realizable value versus what we actually paid for it. So the type of trading we do isn't just take something, give it a lick of paint, tear up the carpet and put some laminate down, and then chuck it back into an auction or do something else with it, or put a tenant in there and just, you know, try and create a bit of a yielding asset. We really do go in and improve the tangibility and the viability of the asset going forward. So I don't see that changing. So we're not looking at pivoting in any way, shape or form from what it is that we're looking at. We are looking at a new asset class to play with. And I say to play with because we really do enjoy what we do. So playful may be the wrong kind of term, but we have traditionally been looking at mixed use, commercial to residential on the upper parts. We've traditionally enjoyed short leases, and we've enjoyed properties. I've enjoyed properties. A new asset class to play with, and I think haptic feedback. We really do enjoy what we do. So playful maybe the wrong kind of term, but we have traditionally been looking at.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Residential. Oh, yeah, right.
Traditionally enjoyed short.
Apologies, Jake.
No problem at all. So I think I've got to commercial and mixed. I like sole commercial as well. Obviously, the deal that we did in October is light industrial, so it's a workshop. So it wasn't the first time I've touched industrial, but it was the first time I'd done for the B1C class. We are probably going to be paying a little bit more attention to some freehold ground rent opportunities in some very specific locations. So that's very new for us, because traditionally we go where the deal is. So we're not geographically limited. So we don't have a golden circle of where we buy and where we sell or anything like that. If the deal stacks and we understand the area and the dynamics, and more importantly, if we understand the fundamentals of the deal itself, we're normally quite comfortable to invest. But this new strategy that we're looking at implementing, certainly we've been trying to secure some opportunities since February, so since before the lockdown. We'll be continuing that process post-lockdown. One of the things that I think people have struggled with is not being able to internally view a property themselves. That hasn't traditionally been an issue for us. We have several routes and opportunities and ways around not being able to view the property ourselves. Sometimes that's because it's not feasible for us to go 400 miles to view a unit. But we've seen some really good solutions to that. I've seen one auctioneer has started on all vacant properties to supply a Matterport video to show you around the property, and that's full HD, so that's a really good option. I think that's something that if post the COVID market, if that survives, that will be a positive for the auction market. I also like the video walkthroughs. I find those fascinating. I like the ones that are guided, so they're actually talking through what they're seeing. I think that's very important to see how someone's reactions change when they go into different rooms. I think that's as important as if you're in the room yourself. The opportunities that I see is I see massive opportunity for investors in general. I think there's been a lot of hype around social housing, and I think that has got some really good future to it. I think maintaining a presence of a high street is vitally important. So being able to take commercial assets on a high street and continue to make them viable and somewhere that people want to go and visit and not just click a button on a screen, I think that's very important. So I think if you are looking for or looking to create a commercial portfolio or develop a commercial premises and maintain a commercial element, I think that's a great opportunity as well, because I think so many people are flooding away from that. I see it very much as the way, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer, a lot of traditional landlords were flooding away from being landlords and trying to do some developments because, Section 24, Article 100, all of these changes to their landscape, and they thought, oh, this is far too difficult, I'll become a developer. I see the same thing with some commercial investors. Probably not the AAA covenant investors, so the people that would be buying Primarks or Debenhams or Tesco's or whatever it may be, but certainly, you know, the B- all the way down to C class covenants. I think those are going to be some great opportunities. I think for us, the status quo is going to remain. We are not motivated sellers and we're not motivated buyers, but we are opportunists. And I think this is an opportunist market. And I think even when the lockdown comes out, I think there is going to be a delay in people taking opportunity, not taking advantage, but just taking opportunities as they arise. I think, and this may be a difficult thing to create some tangibility over, and it may be an element that David is far more coherent on than I would be. But I've normally found, and you know, I'm 34 now, so I've been investing exactly one half of my life. But I've normally found that when a market dips or changes, the very, very last people to notice that dip or change, by and large, are the sellers. The sellers, it takes them so much longer to redress the balance in their expectations, which is why you find entrepreneurial-esque type people like us going, well, actually, there's not much movement in the market. I'll give you 250. I know you had it on the market for 325, but I'm at 250 or whatever that situation may be. And it can take the 6 months for that gap to redress itself. And that, to be honest, there's always a gap between buyers and sellers. All that happens in a downturn is that gap just gets bigger. You just have to work harder to pull those two pieces together. It'll be interesting to hear David's views because I'm a big fan anyway. I think going forward, like I said, it may be disappointing. We're not looking to pivot. We're not looking to change. We're looking at really keeping our ears to the ground, paying attention to the vibrations of change, and then looking for those opportunities really before anyone gets a handle on them. Maybe that's no change from what we did before, but we are going to be ultra sensitive to that going forward. Moreover, because we focus primarily on auctions, and that is a large part of what we do. Our feeling is that the traditional rooms won't be opening until at least the end of Q1 2021 or beginning of Q2. The reason for that is, anywhere between 300 to 700 people in a room is not a good look for a pandemic, which is why they were one of the first places to really shut and close in the first instance. And I think if the government starts releasing the lockdown, I still think that the auctions are going to be a high risk environment. So I think even if you get to December or January of this year and, life in general is back to normal, I think the auctions are going to be at least 4 to 5 months behind that. What else was I going to say that could be of some degree of value? Yes. So I think the fact that auctioneers won't be going back for that length of time means that people are going to have to get far more comfortable with the online method. Now, the beauty of that is actually the online method isn't as tactile or as the traditional room. So you're you remove all of the mess of the room and all the psychology and all the game playing aside, and you're basically just left with you and a clicker, an enter button. So I think if you are looking for opportunities at auction, but you're afraid to go to a room and you want to build up some experience, this is giving you a real good long stop for at least a year to play around with that and really, really get used to it. I'd like to think that post-COVID, that the auctioneers who hadn't touched online previously are going to keep an element of it going forward. They may select to use online either to sell a specific type or specific value class of property because they think it will do better, or that they will use it for any unsold properties that went through auction and just give the online option a longer exchange and completion process. I think that may make it far more viable to a far wider audience, especially in terms of finance. I think the one thing, and I talk about it quite a lot, and actually I think a couple of Sundays ago I was on a live with David and we had mentioned it. COVID comes after, COVID starts with a C and C comes after B, and Brexit was here before COVID was, and no one's talking about Brexit. And Brexit for me is going to be the scorpion's tail in the whole of this tail. It really is, because once COVID comes out and the government and the economy tries to recover from that, we're then going to have to be dealing with Brexit. And, we're not in the same position as the rest of Europe in terms of how post-COVID is going to work for them. At least I don't think so. Although you are hearing some political grumblings from the likes of Italy and a little bit of Spain, but Spain's always grumbling, and Greece, although Greece is technically owned by Germany. So it really is a real kind of hodgepodge. So I would be interested to see how that plays out. I haven't really seen the European Union play a really positive part in supporting its member states throughout this whole process. It's kind of gone silent. I think they've taken a really good opportunity to not hold in court, to not doing any business at all. I'm sure that won't affect any of their pensions or pay. But it was really interesting in terms of that dynamic, and how the peoples of Europe are going to really start finding the value of the union and how that union supports its members. So what are they getting for their annual membership? Would be a question I would be asking myself if we hadn't already left. But it would be very interesting to see. I don't know if it's going to be positive. I don't know if it's going to be negative. But I do know in the short to medium term, it's going to be unknown. And that unknown element is going to create a whole heap of opportunity in property, if you're brave enough to go for it. Yeah, that's me. I'm happy to answer questions and join in the debate. But to be honest, I'm more interested to hear what David's got to say.
Well, Jay, I mean, that was brilliant. I think, for me, you sort of got the opportunities on the market, the fact that you are monitoring change on a micro movement level and spotting little trends starting to emerge and jumping on them before they've come out. And that, for me, is what the market is about. And I think you've shared some real pearls of wisdom. So I know a couple of questions have come in, and what I'd like to say is pop your questions in the live chat box just below, and what we'll do is pose those to Jay. But before we pose them to Jay, to allow you time to type them, we're going to get our next speaker up to talk to you today. Now, our next speaker is another good friend of mine who has produced many videos with me on this YouTube channel, and he's a property millionaire, he's a mentor, a Cambridge University graduate, would you believe? And would you even believe he was a BBC broadcaster and still runs his own radio show on Cam FM every Tuesday night? As well as all that, he manages to squeeze in time to be a landlord of 37 years. And he was doing rent-to-rent before it was even called rent-to-rent. That was actually his very first deal 37 years ago. So he's been around the block a few times. And I say that in a really nice way to you, David. And believe it or not, he also has a fantastic wife as well. And I don't think I can introduce you any more than that. I haven't actually got a book here for you, like I've got this brilliant one that came from Jay. I mean, it's awesome. And he was even kind enough with Piotr to autograph it. So thank you, Jay. But we do have the TARDIS that we were in at the weekend, haven't we? Props galore. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Fantastic DJ David Clouter.
Oh, that's better. Oh my goodness, we're both doing this tonight. Good gracious me. Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me on. Thank you, Jay, for that great talk at the beginning. And I'd like to pick up with, first of all, on Jay's B and C, because what comes before B is A. Now, if we think about Article 24, or some people know it as Section 24 or Clause 24, you see what I did there? Then we've got A, B, and C, three things weighing down on the property market. One of them has been chipping away at it since 2015, with not only restrictions restrictions on mortgage interest that landlords can claim. That was just a tip of the iceberg. And then slash, a lot of other restrictions and regulations and sort of anti-landlord legislation, a whole raft of it, which would tend to push some of the more tired guys out of the market, which would obviously lead to their properties coming on the market, which overall might lead to sort of lowering in prices. Then we've got Brexit. Well, Brexit can go absolutely anywhere at all. It's just all thrown up in the air. George Soros gave an interview this week to a German newspaper where he said Italexit might be on the cards next as Italy goes. And then, as we were saying, Greece aren't very happy, Spain aren't very happy. So kind of, and we saw, one of the things we saw actually with coronavirus, the Schengen Agreement and all these open borders and everything, and then about an hour after Corona's one, everything comes down. So this united front isn't quite as united at the moment, and obviously with Britain being one of the three big net contributors to the EU, that is going to cause a bit of a squabble as well as to how to pick up the deficit. And everybody say, well, I'm not going to do it, and so we're in choppy waters. What could happen starting off with Brexit? And what could happen with Brexit? We'll probably crash out, won't we? Because everybody's in isolation now. Nobody's really talking to anybody about anything. And extending it by another 6 months or a year probably wouldn't make any difference. And we're really kind of at loggerheads now with our European partners, which we shouldn't be. We should be trying to sort of work it all out. If we crash out, what would we become? Would we become a sort of Switzerland, a tax haven, an Isle of Man, this kind of thing, with 2% corporation tax just off the coast of Europe? That's a possibility. The city of London is still the most magical possible place that you can imagine because it's halfway between the Far East and the States. So those traders wake up on the floor. Well, they don't wake up on that. Hopefully they go home, but they're on the trading floor by 5 a.m. or whatever it is. They're working through till midnight. Not the same guys, but England is uniquely placed to do that, and we do have a long kind of track record of stuff. So it's anybody's guess now, really, as to how it will go and to what the effects will be, because certainly German car manufacturers will still want us to buy their cars and so on and so forth. But at the same time, our financial services people will still want passporting. So it's all up in the air. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the landlords quitting the sector en masse, and then this whole turmoil with Brexit. We've got the sea, we've got coronavirus. Now, I'm a smug old git, and I used to kind of, I got very carried away in 1989. And I did a few of the wrong things when there was the first crash. So by 2007 and 8, I'd done a bit of reading. I'd read that excellent book by John Kenneth Galbraith called The Crash of 29, which I always recommend whenever I get the chance to, because although all these kind of crises that we get, they start from a different baseline, from different things cause them, but they kind of play out in the same sort of way, which is basically the government needs to talk it down to calm the markets. And a bit like when you drop a stone into a pond, there's a big sploosh, ripple. Now, it hasn't worked that way with COVID because I didn't see it coming. I don't think anybody did really. And it just hit us thwack. And I wasn't ready for it. I didn't have the reserves built up that I normally do and all this kind of stuff. Whoa, and so everybody, the government, but the thing is, everybody's thinking on their feet there. The government aren't quite doing the sort of calming down thing that they should be doing, with Boris saying last week he doesn't know if there'll ever be a vaccine, even if he thinks that. He should zip it. This is not the kind of thing you say to calm down the country. This gets everybody, woo. But everybody anyway is in a sort of frenzy because of this stay home, go out, go to work, don't go to work speech that he gave a week ago tonight, which had everybody, including me and even Matt Lucas and everybody, confused the hell out of us as to what actually we're supposed to be doing. And we went on a site visit this afternoon, a few miles out of town, on the basis that we're probably allowed to do this now, probably. We didn't get arrested. We got back home again, so that was okay. But we saw a lot more traffic on the road in Cambridge. There were all these people out on their bicycles walking around, and quite sort of close to one another, I would say. I've given up on the old property cycle graphs and things at the moment because I want to know the bigger picture is, how is this virus going to play out for us all? Which is to say, will it fizzle out? I mean, today the number of deaths was 160, and I've got this super graph which I'm going to share with you, whereby a friend of mine, Kevin, and I worked on this, and we input all the numbers every day, and it tells us a lot more than the than you get from the headlines, and so this is what we look at on a daily basis. The bits on the left in blue are your actual numbers from the actual NHS every day. The red dots are the things from the Office of National Statistics. That's the gold standard. And what we do with the red dots is we look at the number of people who've died that week, and how much greater than that is than the 5-year average. So these might not have directly died from the coronavirus. They might have died from effects of the coronavirus. So that they might have had an ailment that they couldn't go in hospital and have treatment for, because everybody's in the wards with coronavirus, and so they died in that way. But that's the consequence for society of all that in terms of excess deaths. The green, and I did this 2 weeks before the guys on the podium, because you can see it wobbles up and down all over the place. So the green is the 7-day moving average, which is a sort of common thing that you use in the City of London. You don't normally use it for pandemics, but I thought that. And then 2 weeks later, well, the guys on the podium are doing that, so that smooths it out a bit. But you can see that as things stand at the moment, it's kind of tailing off, no worries, and everything's calm. However, if everybody did go to the New Forest and to the Lake District and all this sort of thing over the weekend, there's a lag in all of this, and it's very important to remember that it takes you 5 days. This is why this virus is so difficult, so dangerous. It takes 5 days to have any symptoms, and during that time you're exhaling, you're also talking spews out huge amounts of this virus. So I'm glad we're all at home at the moment, and that's a terrible thing. And people jogging past you in the street are breathing on you. Cyclists leave a sort of 5-meter plume of bits behind them, and all this sort of stuff. So by ending this lockdown, and it's a very, very, very fine balance, because if we don't end the lockdown, we've had a prediction of a 14% fall in the GDP for this year, and that came not from some pundit, from the Bank of England. And okay, admittedly with a 15% rise next year, but it's all conditional on getting business and commerce and society up and running as quickly as possible. We heard today, didn't we, that Transport for London have had this massive injection, 1.6 billion pound bailout, but they're down far more than that. I think it was it 3 or 4 million pounds down they are. I'm trying to sort of find the number. So extraordinary hit that our society is taking in so many ways, and airlines grounded, and shopping malls deserted, and so forth. And so I think the thing to ask ourselves now is, what impact is all of this turmoil that we're seeing going to have on the property market, because it does obviously work through, and it's only just as the scientists are just beginning to discover the nature of this virus. So we're just beginning to see the possibilities of how it'll pan out. And basically, if we go to work too soon, we're in severe trouble, because it peaks again. And the second peak on these things, the pandemics often have 3 peaks. One is there, one is right up there, and then one is there again. We've had that one, you see. So if that one happens, we're in very, very, very big trouble indeed. Let's keep our fingers crossed that as lockdown eases, and the government have got these phased responses that they're going to do, and they've said that they will put the foot on the brake again if we're naughty and so forth. But there was a residential global market sentiment survey from Savills, and I'm a great fan of these kinds of things, and they're looking at the impact of COVID-19 on long-term buyer demand. So and the kind of factors that will influence this. And the first thing to say before I delve into those numbers is that certain of our habits have changed. And it's how many days? 50? We started week 8 now. I think we're starting week 8 now. 7 8 to 56, aren't they? Yeah. So we're on to day 1 of week 8. And whoa, those distant memories of going to the park with the kids or something, or catching a bus, or yearning to go to Sainsbury's or something with a carrier bag. And this is how we get our kicks nowadays. And things that were even sort of being sort of a accosted by the opinionated bloke on the street, leaning on his gate, telling you his views of the world, and you miss all that kind of stuff. But we as Homo sapiens, we're creatures of habit, and so the longer these really kind of artificial and quite weird situations continue, the more they become the norm. And the more we think, I think to myself, well, I'm not sure if I could have gone up to rugby tonight and done this, because then at 10 o'clock I've got to do that, and yet here I am up in rugby doing this, and similarly at 9 o'clock I'll be doing something else, and so that works for me as a kind of speaker. For people attending these things, how many people who are watching us now would have made the trip to Great Property Meet on the floor to see it? And then, well, absolutely. Every single one of us. But then moving forward, Andrew's got to think, well, do I stream it as well as having the meeting in future? Will I get more viewers or not? And people are gonna. But then, will that determine the locals? So in every area of our life, and Jay's got to think, there's a great buzz in the room, in the auction room, but it seems to be working okay online. And so, do we need to go back to all that? And I love the auction room because I can position myself where I can see what's going on, and I can see the wink and all that, and get that vibe from the room. You can't get it in an online sort of context. So I'm a great fan of that. I've fallen out of love with the cashiers at the bank, even the pretty ones, because what I used to go in there regularly every single week, and have a bit of a chat, and now that I discovered my and Andrew and I were sort of boasting about our little thing. Now that I discovered this, there's no stopping me, and the sky's the limit. And I've also discovered some website by some guy, what's his name, Bezos, and they just deliver stuff to my door. Whereas I'd go down to Maplin, although to be fair, they have closed for a couple of years. But I used to yearn for those days, and I don't anymore. And so stuff gets delivered to my home. I'm never someone who had to commute in the first place, but you can imagine that people who used to commute don't like that anymore, and big firms, big corporates with enormous numbers of square meterage of office space are finding, hey, all our KPIs are still being met, and the business is working satisfactorily, and everything's ticking over nicely. Do we really need all this? And some of them are in a 10-year lease, FRI lease with no break clause. Some of them are not. And so we may see commercial space being repurposed, and my sort of out off the wall kind of random thing here is that perhaps some of that will get used for hydroponics, because as we find the global supply chain less reliable, and these things that were coming in on containers and chilled and everything, when I'm in the supermarkets now, you can either have kiwi or blueberries or apples, or you never have the full spread anymore. It's like living in the bleeding Soviet Union, although to be fair, I never did, but it's as one would imagine. So coming back to this Savills survey, 86% of the respondents that they asked expected an increase in working from home after coronavirus. Expected. So employees will say, hey, being squashed like this on the train for hours on end, it just doesn't rock my boat anymore. And with the fact that we will be, whatever the cure comes or doesn't come, or time span, we will be realistically social distancing for the rest of the year. So your trains are going to be half empty in any event. So there is going to be this trend to work from home. 73% of respondents to this thing, and that's because we're all stir crazy at home here, felt that a green space will become a priority for urban buyers. And 61% of those people, and I will be one of those 61%, anticipate a rise in demand for rural areas, because I can't even go to my front gate without somebody drives up their car, rolls down the window and says, "Go light, mate," and there's people sort of going past the whole time because I'm right in the city centre here, and you have to think to yourself, do I need that anymore? So these are sort of radical changes that are going to happen in markets, and these are going to have knock-on effects for demand, for pricing, and we are going to start to come out now. But the big question that I put for you to you guys is, are we coming out to the same world that we left? Will the new world be different, and will it be better, or will it be worse?
Well, David, that was quite mind-blowing. I think we've touched on everything from it takes 28 days to form a habit to actually the changing habits of how people are going to work and live. and changes in demand for the use of property. So what do you guys think out there? Drop some comments. Do you agree with what David said, or do you disagree with what David said? I'd love you to challenge some of his points of view. I think there's a few things there that overlap with other things that I know, and I think you've got a really great way of putting it, David, and also sharing 7-line trend line data as well. So on that, I need to grab a glass of water. Do you want to introduce the next guest for me, David?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. It's with great pleasure that I introduce tonight's final guest, Mr. Mystery. This is somebody that I respect and admire immensely. I don't do many of my own events, but I did an event in November, which was attended by Mr. Ranjan Bhattacharya of the Baker Street Property Meet. John Corey came along there. He's a top line fella. Fiona Talbot, that £20 million investor from Ely, was along there. I was along there, plus Mr. Mystery. He doesn't come out to speak very often at property events, so I was very honoured that he said yes. I only asked 4 people to do that event, and all 4 of them said yes. So that was a fabulous thing, and we got, I think, 5,500 views online for the event, in addition to the people who came on the day because we filmed it. So this is one of the most recognised and respected names in the industry, and he has personally supported the Great Property Meet for the past 4 years, although he's never got up on stage and headlined before. So this is going to be a first. This is someone whose advice and counsel, very wise counsel, I respect immensely. It's with great pleasure that I do a weekly series with him, and this is someone you absolutely will not want to miss. So I want you to put your hands together now for the one, the only Mr. Andrew Roberts.
Well, thank you hugely for that brilliant introduction there. I don't know what to say, David. That was really kind of you. And I thought I would actually like to share some of the thoughts on what I've been doing and what I've been looking at for the exit. Now that the barriers are starting to lift, the estate agents are opening, but also what the year ahead could look like. And it's a very interesting year ahead, because what I'm seeing is the potential for the rent deferrals that Rishi Sunak put in place to have a big impact on landlords' cash flows. The reason being, you've obviously had a lack of cash coming in. And during that period when rents have been deferred or rents have been scaled back by your tenants, what we like to see is you can't evict them at the moment, but they can move on. And I anticipate there being a few tenants perhaps doing a little bit of a runner and doing a bunk without paying you that shortfall of rent. Now, that's going to leave a hole in your pocket, and you've got a choice of try and find them and chase them or write it off. Either way, it's a long game, and it's no winners for anybody. In addition, there is likely to be an element of unemployment which rises throughout the course of the next 12 months, which will have an impact on rents, rent payments, occupancy levels, and perhaps tenants moving from an upmarket 2-bed to a lower quality 2-bed so that they can afford. So affordability will come under pressure. I do predict there to be a lot more regulation as well within the residential marketplace. We're seeing different towns. Local to my area, there's Coventry, and they're introducing a mandatory licensing across the whole area. It's in Nottingham, it's in a number of towns and cities, and I see that rippling nationally. And A, councils' cash flows have been hit big time by the effects of COVID-19, but B, this is a soft target to put cash in. If you looked at Nottingham, they raised over £19 million from landlords implementing a mandatory licensing scheme. And on the back end of that, they only issued, I think it was less than 100 licenses, yet had taken in nearly £20 million. It was over 19 million. So there's questions over what was happening to that cash and was it improving the quality of housing? Now, something which really does frighten me, really frightens me, and I've had over a dozen people in the last 2 weeks come to me with sob stories about what has happened to them and their experience in property. And this is all around private investors' money. People who've done joint ventures, people who've used other people's money, OPM, people who've given loans to investors. The investors are not repaying the loans. The investors are either doing a bump with the money, or they've hit the buffers cash flow wise. They can't refinance like they predicted. And that is going to cause some issues within the sector where you get stressed investors who developed something but can't refinance out, or it's not quite fully developed, but they've hit the buffers because of the lockdown. And they're either going to be forced to sell, or worse still, you could have the FCA come into the industry and swoop and do a crackdown on those investors who've not been following the rules. So that's something to be very wary of, because these are times when I think Jay and David have already indicated prices are likely to be headed south a little bit. If prices are going south and you banked on refinancing, or not necessarily you, but people you know have banked on refinancing to pay investors back, valuers are not necessarily going to do that, which then leaves you with a hole. And you might end up robbing Peter to rob Paul, to rob Tom, to rob Sid, just to pay somebody back. The other thing to look at is company failures. Now, Rishi Sunak has done a fantastic job of pumping cash into the economy. He's furloughed staff, paying employers to keep them on payroll. He's introduced BBL loans, bounce back loans, which I've done a series of videos on, and that gives you up to £50,000 towards your business. And that could be a lifeline to help your business through the cash flow. Now, why are company failures, and why have I picked on company failures right now? Well, because all of this cash is coming in, employees' wages have been being paid by 80%, assuming the employers have not been topping up for 20%, it's actually cost the employer nothing. The companies are potentially getting C-bills loans or bounce-back loans. That is more cash flow to keep them running. And companies are going to come out of this, and we'll see insolvencies and administration down this year because they've had cash propping them up. But what we're going to see happen is next year, what I'm terming a belly flop happening, because a number of things are all going to happen at the same time. You're going to have VAT deferrals that you were offered kick in. In addition to the VAT deferrals, you will have the income tax payments that have also been deferred to around about this time next year. And you'll have your first bounce back loan payments and your first C-bills payments. And you won't have any SEIS, self-employed income stream coming in from the government, the grant that they've given to self-employed. So we're going to see a belly flop there, where we'll have almost a double bubble of company failures at that point when we belly flop. In addition to that, the economy will be slowing. We're going to come out of it and people will be energized and get going, but the lethargy will hit again next year. And that'll be around 12 months from now. Now, that's about the same time as repossessions will start to be coming to market as well. So we're going to see prices slide, in my opinion, next year. So it's important that you prepare your cash flow and your reserves. If there's a grant available, don't say, oh, I don't want to take that grant because I'd rather work for it. Take the grant, build up your reserves. If there's a BBL loan or a C-bills loan, get the loan, to prop up your reserves. We do not know, and David indicated there could be a second wave, which could be a bigger spike than this one. If that happens, do you have the reserves to ride it? Can you ride the rent deferrals that you possibly already had and get back from those? So there's a couple of negatives. Now, let's have a look at some of the positives. The positives that I see coming forward for this coming 12 months. Well, the first one was announced in March 2020, the National Planning Policy Framework. And what they've basically done is announced a number of things that are going to come live. There will be a new permitted development framework developing on brownfield sites. So this is previously developed sites which are no longer fit for purpose, and you can demolish those under permitted development and redevelop them. It's announced, and they're aiming to have this in place by the summer of 2020, permitted development to build upwards, add an additional 2 floors onto buildings. Now that's really exciting. Predominantly in commercial, because most residential houses you'll struggle to add 2 extra floors on because the footings down below are not deep enough to support the structure above that you will build. But if you've got a building that's suitable, permitted development, around about £100, maximum 56 days. I've done it in 9 days with permitted development before. You can get yourself an additional 2 floors for the cost of the work. That is cheap. You've already got the building and the infrastructure, and I predict that that will be a big trend coming up. So I'm starting to land bank that type of property that is suitable for it. Again, there's permitted development to demolish commercial and industrial buildings and develop new residential. Wow, you need to get out there and fill your boots with that one, because that is going to be huge. Permitted development to demolish commercial and industrial and build residential. So if you're land banking these sort of sites, now is the time over the next 12 months to actually start building yourself that pipeline of work. Now, I specifically invest in commercial, and I was listening to David and hearing him say that people are going to want to work more from home. I've also been listening to and talking to a lot of employers, big employers and small employers, and feeling the pulse of what their businesses are doing. Now, one of the major banks has actually said to me that they're actually planning on not reopening some of their large head office facilities because the staff working at home has worked phenomenally well for their business, and they are saving hundreds of thousands of pounds in commercial premises costs, which obviously is a problem if you're a commercial office owner of a large office, because you might suddenly find your tenants don't renew their leases. Also, if you are locked into a 25-year lease and you've still got 20 years to go, that's a heck of a break clause that you're paying if you're the commercial property owner. So there's an awful lot of change ahead. Now, with this change, what you need to do is look at the market and feel it. And Jay was saying you need to be sensitive and pick up the micro pulses. You've almost got to pick up a mouse walking past you and the mouse footprints on the floor. That's how sensitively you have to analyse and feel the market. And I am building a pipeline of sites which are suitable for permitted development, and elements of them I will be converting to residential and disposing of. Elements of it I will be converting for uses in the commercial marketplace that will either grow or will never be able to go, because Jeff Bezos can't cut your hair and he can't give you a tattoo, and he certainly can't give you a pint with your mates. So there's certain types of real estate out there that are still worth investing in. The important thing is, don't just buy it, you have to add a lot of value. And that goes back to what Jay was saying there, which is he buys assets that have been poorly managed and he adds value before flipping them out to another buyer. So to me, the next 12 months 2 years have a number of opportunities, but we will see next year predominantly a larger number than normal of company failures, which is going to lead to more commercial premises coming available that wouldn't ordinarily. And that is where you need to seize on things like the planning framework and look at what you can do with those sites. So I could go on forever, but I'm conscious of the time, and we said we'd get to a Q&A. So that's all from me. What I will do, I will pick up the reins as host again, and I will pose some questions to our esteemed panel that have been coming in. So if you've got some questions, please feel free to share those now on the YouTube. And what I'll be doing is picking up with those. Now, a question that came in for yourself, Jay, from Max Prang, I think it is, was, do you have any tips for bidding at auction online? Because he's interested in bidding online, but is not quite sure how to go about it. Do you have any top tips there?
Yes. Unfortunately, for the most part, they're practical tips, because the online model, as they're structured at the moment, haven't been subsisting for a very long time. So it's probably the same kind of approach I would make if I was in an in-room auction. So the first one is, do not be the first to bid. Do not be the one to make the first move. The reason I recommend that is because at all points, the auctioneer is always going to try and make the first move. And you need to make sure that the person who is making the first move is either the auctioneer or somebody else. Okay, because that really plays out the hand of how many people are interested, how many people are active, how many people are motivated. And this is really very important, because although you're looking at sellers at auction being motivated, you yourself do not want to become a motivated buyer. So always allow the other person to play their hand first. You know, it doesn't matter if they're holding aces. What matters is that they show you what they're holding before you play your first hand. That's step one. Step two is, depending on the auction company, and this is really very important, every auction company operates their online and their in-room auctions completely differently. What they require from you, when they require it from you, and how they operate are all slightly different. So it's highly important that you understand the house rules in advance, so you can learn how to game the system to a certain extent. So if you were, for instance, tomorrow looking at Allsops Commercial, as I know I will be, if you're looking to bid, you need to have pre-registered and been pre-approved, I think 24, 48 hours before the auction. So you have to be able to put yourself in that position. Now, the important thing here is you need to understand how they're running the bids. So for Allsops, they use what they call a bidding widget. So a widget is something that you connect onto your website. And this widget, basically, it runs the auction concurrently. I think there's a 1 or 2 minute delay from lot 1 to lot 2, and then vice versa all the way up. But the auction will be running concurrently. So I would recommend logging on at 5 minutes past 12. If it's lot 1 that you're interested in. If it's lot 20, you know, log in at almost 1 o'clock and you'll still be fine to start. So it's important to understand that dynamic in an online bidding environment. The other thing that you need to do is the widget is connected to the cookies on the auctioneer's website. So this cookie can pick up whether your mouse is active. I don't know if people can see me moving my mouse over my picture. They probably can't. But they can't. Brilliant. I know nothing about technology, but I know this. They can tell whether you're about to hover over the bid button. Okay, that's very interesting. And this is the difference between the online and traditional room, is that the auctioneers have so much more data. An auctioneer can run and manage a room and can kind of pick up on body cues. They're really very good at this, but they cannot pick up on 10 people hovering over "I'm about to bid now" button, but they can now. So what I would say is, be very careful that when you are on that page and you're logged in and you're ready to bid, that you bid without giving them any advance warning. Okay, and the reason you're doing that is because actually when you bid, the other potential bidders, the other watchers, same thing with eBay, can see whether you're moving to bid or whether you have bid. Okay. Some of the auctions, and there's a company out there that's providing a bespoke platform. Everyone knows Essential Information Group. If you're into auctions, they are the Rightmove, Zoopla, Prime Location, everything of auctions. They're the place to be. They provide this technology and they make it bespoke per auction company because they know different auctioneers work in slightly different ways. So I haven't tried the Allsops auction widget yet, but I will be tomorrow. And I'll be trying to figure out whether they allow you to place jump bids, or it's like you can only bid in a certain increment. So whether it's a 500 or £1,000 increment, if they enable you to jump from a 500 or give you an option between 3 or 4 bid types, I would be looking very early doors at putting in the highest bid and seeing how many people that scares away. It's unlikely to do that very early on, but as it starts getting towards the sexier volume in terms of bids, like there's been 30 or 40 bids and the price has gone up 10 or 20,000 pounds, I would like to then do a jump bid just to see how many people are real or how many people are just trying to play with the price. Because at that point, once the bidding goes above 10% of the guide, that's the real deal. That's when you absolutely unequivocally are completely sure that any bid past this 10% means I'm owning this property. The chances have gone from a 50% to now a 70 or 80% chance. The only other chances are that someone else is going to pay slightly more. So once you understand that dynamic, you're now in a position to say, actually, anything I do within that 10% above the guide price is almost meaningless. So you can let someone else play out an early game and then you can go in above the 10% and start to dominate. I think those are the only real ways that you're going to use a mechanism, influence a mechanism from afar.
Well, I was going to say, I hope you're not bidding on the same lot as me, Jake, tomorrow.
I'm not, as an absolute courtesy, since you told me about it, I have certainly not considered it for my own use.
No, but I was going to say, an interesting lot that is. I mean, there's some really good lots tomorrow with Allsops.
You know, I always use this adage, there's no such thing as a good or bad auctioneer. There's only good or bad lots. Right? The lots in a specific catalogue will categorise an auctioneer as either good for that month or not good for that month. That's based on the results and that's based on how sexy they make those lots look. And Allsops, you know, it's the reason why they are, you know, at least in the Estates Gazette's view, the top auctioneer in the country. That's why they kind of maintain that #1 spot on the leaderboard, because they normally have 200 lots on the residential and the commercial side, so they're killing it in terms of lot average. They do really good sales. There's parts of their marketing I really enjoy, parts of it I'm not a fan of, but that's pernickety things for me. That's not something anyone else really needs to worry about or care about. But it's how they put all of that together. And I think this catalogue at least makes them look like a good auctioneer.
Yeah. Well, I got the same data email that you got this afternoon, and I was reading that, and I'm like, whoa, there's some big swings there. I mean, they were big movements, and it was like, am I reading this right? So I'm glad you clarified for me, Jay.
Well, I mean, it's one of these things. I mean, you were talking in your talk, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, the fact that, you know, before COVID-19, centralised government was reducing its funding to local government. And local government have had a massive reduction in funding because there are no speeding fines, there are no parking tickets, there are no the X, Y, and Zs. People aren't using, the government parking lots and things like that. They're not bringing it in, and I think that's going to be really very interesting. I don't want to be negative because it starts looking like some dystopian Orwellian nightmare that we're walking into, and I really don't think that's the case. But there's a lot of interesting dynamics at play, and if you can distance yourself, you know, take a bird's eye view and remove the emotion and the fear of what's happening, whether it's in your business or how you're going to afford your mortgage payments and all these other things, you know, probably since 1706 we're not going to see there's that a lie, is it 1706 or 1506? Let me get my numbers back. It is 1706. I shouldn't question myself. 1706 was the last time we had a major drop in terms of our country's value in terms of GDP, and that was, I think, by about 15 or 16%. And if we're looking at 14, you know, actually, no, I think it was 14. So it'd just be an equal drop. I know this is probably more your style, David, than mine, but historically, I'm pretty good with stuff like that. But it's, you know, it's what a time to be alive, because if you're right-minded and you're looking at the opportunity, you're taking all of these things together, you're understanding that money, like energy, doesn't disappear, it doesn't dissipate, it just moves. And once you understand where the movement of that money is, where the movement of that opportunity is, you're going to put yourself in a really good position. So it's great to be on a panel and start talking to people like you guys, and there's a lot of other good people out there that are talking about it. You know, we all know Adam Lawrence, who's a good guy, who talks about stuff like this. You know, Rod Turner talks about stuff like this, and you know, Fiona Tapman. You know all the people. I'm not going to name drop. There's no point, but there's some really good commentary out there from some highly intelligent people, and I love it. Obviously, there are pressures and concerns. I'm human. I have them like everybody else does. But an interesting point that David pointed out was, you know, before all this kicked off, me and the wife were thinking about moving further out of London. I mean, obviously, I think the baby is a motivation for that. But, you know, it's our value in terms of where we sit in the marketplace has completely changed. And we need to move to find that correct value point for us. So we're looking at heading towards like North Bedfordshire kind of area. And I think it's a beautiful part of the world, and some great value opportunities based on where we are now to where we could be in a year's time.
And the
I
benefits
thought you were going to say Northamptonshire for a minute then.
Oh,
and
no,
you let me down with the North Bedfordshire.
Could you imagine both of our personalities in
Starts
that
with an
same
A,
county?
it comes before the B.
Could you imagine our personality in the same county? I mean, actually, it's a good thing that David's in Cambridgeshire as well. All three of us, it would cause a mass disaster effect. There's probably some kind of energy compound that would just create a mini black hole that will suck all of existence into one tiny point. But that was slightly off topic.
But you see, here's another interesting point, coming back on what Jay's saying about relocating. If we're all working from home, then we don't need to be near that office in the city. So this might affect residential price differences across the country. Perhaps there'll be some sort of balancing up to a degree.
Yeah, which one of you discussed the Bank of England? Had a little bit of a snipe on the Bank of England.
Oh, no, I didn't. I was very complimentary about them.
I think so. I think just a point. If anyone's interesting for a dissenting view, I was a really big fan of Mervyn King when he was, you know, in charge of the Bank of England, and he had a piece in the Guardian called "Get a Grip." It was by Mervyn King. Brilliant article. If you're looking for a dissenting view on how he thinks that the bank should be have a part and the government should be playing its part in this process, brilliant opportunity and it's there. If you got their digital platform or you pay for that, jump on there, read that. It's a brilliant commentary.
Agreed.
Yeah,
One other
it was brilliant.
very little thing I thought of while Joe's talking about this app. What if you use a touch screen? That nails it, doesn't it? I should, but don't tell anyone. That's our little advantage for the people who are on here tonight.
Yeah, well, it actually leads very nicely into a question about property prices after lockdown, with all of the change that's being talked about. And I'm going to take a contrarian view, because I mean, this is quite contrarian to the views that you've got of moving out the city and moving away to the country, the two of you, in that the world is happening. And at the moment, we're all in a goldfish bowl, and everything is magnified. And we've got so much time to think and cogitate and everything else. And I would challenge and say it takes 28 days to form that habit. At the moment, if you're at home and you're furloughed, you're getting paid. If you're at home and you're working from home, then you're working from home. And it's an artificial environment. Employers and businesses are going to get back to normal and get productivity up and get sales and trading going. Therefore, they are going to drive that demand. And I don't like drawing the parallel, but there are terrorist events that happen in large cities, And what you notice is for 24, 48 hours, the city's sort of like, whoa, let's not go on the trains or the tubes or the buses and let's stay away. But then after 48 hours, they all start coming back. And within a week, everything's back to normal. So I would actually take a contrarian view and say people will get back to normal. And old habits of jump in the car, fill it with petrol, get yourself your Costa coffee or Starbucks, whatever, from the petrol station, stop at Greg's of a lunchtime, and all these habits that you had, people are missing their little routines, and they will very quickly drop back into those routines. But how do you think, because the questions come in, how do you think the current situation is going to affect prices, and over what period of time do you think it'll affect prices? If I start with you first, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I would play on my point in my first part of the discussion where I said vendors normally take about 6 months to redress value and proceed to sell a value that a buyer would see as reasonable. This is a really difficult question to answer. For me, because I think that it will be, I think there's going to be, and people have been saying this for a while, but it's a really good finance term, a dead cat bounce, where there's going to be an artificial high after there's a full ceasing of the lockdown restrictions. If you can call them restrictions, it's more like guidance, which is a bit flim-flam for me. But if there is a full release of that at a governmental level, saying actually, no, we're fine, there's no risk of a second outbreak, blah, 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 and everyone can go about their business, I think that's going to create a massive vacuum effect, which is just going to pull in all of this money that's been sitting on, people have been sitting on their hands, getting itchy and fidgety, and they're just going to go out and buy something that looks like it's either good or just put money to action, which is what we as investors like to do, put money into action. And it's going to be an interesting situation, because I actually think the majority of opportunity, so if you're a portfolio landlord, jumping into dead cat bounce is not going to make a blindest bit of difference to your situation. You're not looking at selling for the next 25 years, or watch its space in 5 and you'll get on with life at year 6. If you're looking at flipping, that dead cat bounce is probably be quite favorable for you, because you'll be in and out within a month or 2. Perfect. If you're looking at trading, you like I would, you're going to run up a couple of issues depending on what level of trader you are. If you are a mass volume trader, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, you're going to break even on some, and that's your life before COVID, during COVID, and post COVID. So you'll crack on as normal. If you're value add as I am, it's not going to affect you at all, because I'm looking at creating a massive change in value. So even if the value does drop by 5 or 10%, the impact to me is minimal, because the value is achieved already at the point of purchase. If you are a trader who is trading on an option, or trading via assisted sale, or doing things like that, actually you're too slow into the market to be able to move in that dead cat bounce. Now, what I think will happen is that dead cat bounce will last for about, I work on a year, not by 12 months, by auction cycle. So I think it will probably go on for maybe 2 to 3 auction cycles, which is, roughly 4 months. So a quarter, that's probably a better way to put it, for a clear quarter. I think that quarter is coming up now, actually. I think since the news was released that people can go back and do viewings, I think that's created almost as a business as usual in terms of property. So I would say the dead cat bounce was probably kicked off last week. So I would say May-ish, June, July, August, yes, because actually traditionally August, no, because people would bugger off on holidays, right? And that's why traditionally there are no auctions in August, or very limited auctions in August. So I think that's your 4-month high. I think when September hits, it's going to be a slightly different story. I then feel, depending on how they manage the extension of furlough, if lockdown isn't released at that point, whether they reduce the government funding down to 60%, and then whether the businesses will top up or not, I think that's going to create a massive pinch point, because the affordability at that point doesn't just hit the people who are earning £15,000 a month. There's obviously furlough is capped at 2,500. That drop down to 60 instead of 80 really starts to hit the middle to lower middle market. That's going to be really painful. That's then going to, I think, create a massive, whole bunch of people looking to sell their properties before they're probably put into some kind, well, actually it depends on whether the banks increase their mortgage holiday, which is effective, but only during a time like this. Going forward from that, I think it's going to cause trouble for people. I think you're going to be looking at one of two things. I think your point, Andrew, about unemployment is interesting, because it would be interesting to see whether that breaches the fact that we've had a 5-year low on unemployment, whether the unemployment will go back to just what it was in 2014, 2015, or whether it will breach that point and head back into the late 80s, early 90s. And I think anyone reasonable is going to assume that that's probably going to be the case. Hopefully not, but it's going to definitely breach the 2014, 2015 figures. If that's the case, what you're looking at is a bottleneck. Now, a bottleneck is perfectly fine. Now, the bottleneck is either there's an increased number of people looking to sell, but not enough people looking to buy. There you have that built in, there's a bottleneck. It just means that things go through a lot slower. Or you have the opposite, which I think is happening now, which is actually there are too many people looking to buy, but not enough people looking to sell at the right kind of level. And that creates a bottleneck. So I think you're going to be seeing a flip and a turn of bottlenecking for at least the next year to 18 months. How is that going to affect value? I think that's going to affect value in one of two ways. One, sellers are going to be leaving their properties on the market. These aren't people just putting it on the market just for their ego to see, oh, how much is my property worth? No, these are people who are going to be looking to sell, but they're going to be looking to sell at a value. But I don't think that value is a tangible value, especially if you're following the estate agency model of let's give them any price they want just to put it in our pretty window and negotiate them down, which traditionally is how estate agency has worked. If you're looking at an increase in sales through auction, which I think in about 12 to 18 months is probably going to be feasible, because there are going to be more repossessions, there's going to be more LPA receiverships through bankruptcy. I completely agree with Andrew's points on that. I think that is going to create a marketplace in and of itself. And remember, property sales started via the auction route. Before there were estate agents, there were auctioneers. And that was the same for pretty much most marketplaces, cars, equine. I think still use a lot of auctions at equine. Even fruit and vegetables are still done. There's certain auctions and things like that. So I think the market is going to be really very interesting. But I think actually over the next 2 years, we're looking at a price drop. But I'm also predicting, unless they can provide some kind of stimulus, and they being the government, of course, can provide some kind of stimulus, whether that's not a stamp duty holiday, but maybe a holiday for people who are downsizing, or maybe people who've been moving laterally. I don't think they're going to offer any kind of reduction or discount for property investors. I'm sorry, guys. No, it's not going to happen. But actually for homeowners, so if you're selling your house and you're buying another one, I can see that as being either a discount or completely removed. And I think that would be a really good way to do it. I don't think they can do that for a very long period of time, because, stamp duty really does contribute to the GDP. We have a finite amount of space, and transactions through property does fill up the coffers quite nicely. So although they'll probably do something to, just a starter engine bump to get things moving, I don't think it will subsist for very long. So I think there's a lot of caution to be taken with that. But at the same time, there is a reason why everyone says build yourself a war chest, fill your coffers, get cash heavy now, because the opportunities are coming, and you need to be able to create multiple exits for those opportunities. That means whether you're going to be selling it, whether you're going to be trading it, whether you're going to be holding it, whether you're going to portfolio it, you have to be able to do all of those with everything that you're buying, because if plan A doesn't work, plan B has to work. Plan B doesn't work, God knows plan C is going to have to pull you out of the river. And if plan C doesn't work, you're going to need plan D to come into the fore. So just make sure you're structuring yourself correctly. Just be as considerate as possible. I don't mean considerate of other people's feelings. I mean, be considerate of the assets that you're dealing with and the money that you're utilizing, whether it's your own or somebody else's. And please be aware of this: if it's somebody else's, treat it 10 times the more value than if it is your own money. Cannot stress that enough. traditionally, and I haven't been shy about this, haven't used a great deal of finance in the past. Pretty much all of my transactions up until my own reside here has all been through joint venture finance, so private investors funding me, and I've done that successfully for so many years, because if something goes wrong in the deal, I will walk away with absolutely nothing, and I will give absolutely everything back, including all of the profit, to the joint venture partner, and that is a differential. And I think if you're moving into this market and you're confident, or you've got a new strategy, or you found an angle, and you are using someone else's finance, or you're using an investor's finance, make sure that you're in a position that you can walk away at a total loss, but the investor walks away with absolutely everything they went into it with, and whatever you can afford to them. So that's just a sideline walk.
Well, I think that's a really good testament to your values there, Jay. And it's the same view that I have, is you shouldn't get into this unless you're prepared to walk away carrying the loss. You should not make anybody else suffer along that journey.
Absolutely.
Just to satisfy your own greed. And I touched on it where I've had over a dozen people come to me with situations where they have had investors walk out on them, having left them short of their money. So really great point. I mean, I think you covered that point comprehensively, but David, I'd fire at you a sort of question that come in based on cycles and everything else, is how do overseas investors see the UK market at this point in time? Do you think they're seeing us as a sort of bubble market, or do you see us as a slider, or where do you perceive that overseas investors see the UK?
I don't think there's a consensus. During Brexit, there was a sort of consensus, but the reason for that is that the government were just completely doolally, and the whole government went into paralysis for 2.5 or 3.5 years or whatever it was. So nobody's going to invest in a market like that, especially since there was a possibility that Jezza would get into number 10. So that was just a real pariah. That was the thing that kept the overseas investors away. They like the fact that we're an island. They liked the fact that we still have one way or another the city of London, so that's good. They'll be looking to see what the exchange rates do, because that's going to make a huge difference to the sort of profitability of deals, or otherwise. I think that's a key thing. I don't know, do overseas investors? I don't think they do. They don't come in and hoover up deals from developers, because the developers are going to be struggling even earlier than Jay's scenario suggested. These guys are on bridging finance, and they're feeling the heat. And there are cases where prices have dropped 30%. You know, they'll probably take less than that, and you can hoover things up. They're nearly finished. It's not a strategy that I use, but there are, opportunities there. There's a bit of gazundering going on as well in parallel with this bounce. There are people putting in cheeky low offers, where throughout lockdown the process of their purchase has slowed down, and where there's a chain involved. I've heard cases of 50 grand being knocked off the offer price for something. I think that's cheeky. I think it's kind of uncalled for. And vendors, as again, I think it was Jay who said this at the beginning, vendors are the last to appreciate that there's been a correction in the value of their cherished assets. So that isn't necessarily a kind of strategy that's going to work. In terms of this September, it kind of correcting a bit, that works in both scenarios. It works in Jay's scenario, and it works in my second peak scenario. So there are two possible ways things that go, where both of our crystal balls point to possibly that thing happening. So I've got something to sell quickly, and I'm going to get on the case and get the refurb teams in, and it's not quite ready yet. All my things are not ready until they've had a little bit of spot and polish, I think. But I won't do the usual over-the-top staging this time. We'll just get it out there and go with it, which galls me, because I've staged things for nearly 20 years. But just have it nice, you know, magnolia'd and what have you. We don't do that anymore, do we? But you know the kind of thing, and get it out there, because it's probably a better in one of these rocky markets. You have to get in there quick. You can't dawdle, and you can't get that analysis paralysis thing. And so I do think it's a good time for us guys to get moving. When the overseas investors the overseas investors in their markets may be suffering from the coronavirus thing, which might impact their outward investment. Oh, there was one question I did want to put to Jay quickly. He says that you know, you add value at the point of purchase, which you absolutely do, and we all do this. And I'll ask that question to you, Andrew, as well. Do you think, and you know, we all know the ways that we use, but do you think in this particular pretty roller coastery kind of situation that there are particular ways of adding value out of our armory that might work better now in this once in 100-year cycle than in the normal course of events? Who wants to go first?
Shall I go first? I mean, in terms of adding value at this point in time, I think there is going to be a lot of permitted development opportunities coming forward, and that is a way to very quickly add value. I've also come across stuff recently which basically is got what I call legal defects. There's nothing wrong with the bricks and the mortar, but there's paperwork issues. They've had works undertaken but haven't got the correct paperwork. They've had things like a solar panel dumped on the roof of the building that they lease, but they again haven't got the correct paperwork for that. So there's lots of things that people are going to come to market with. And what I find typically is vendors really don't want to spend the money. They're too tight to actually recognize the problem and to deal with the problem. And I think that is where we can add a lot of value very quickly without doing too much. And Jay does that with his reproposition of properties. I do it in commercial, and I've got a lot which I've been speaking to Jay about, which is up tomorrow. And we've got about 8-10 different things we can do with that site. And all of them, you sit there and go, well, that's going to add value, that. Each way, heads you win, tails you win. And it's an always up deal. And
more importantly, we spent an hour talking about what could go wrong and how. Exactly, but it's not just all the upsides. We're talking about what can go wrong and how do these upsides offset from that value. So you have to.
Totally. So I think that's what I would be doing. I mean, Jay, what's your thought? How would you add value without necessarily getting the builders in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So with the exception of one property conversion I've done, I've never got the builders in. So everything that I do has to be based on fixing a legal issue, which I'm a massive fan of. It's probably my most useful or used degree of the three. You know, the law degree, it means I can go through a legal pack and have some appreciable knowledge or experience I can apply to solving and adding value instantly. So I'm normally looking at something that people are terrified of. I sometimes wait for it to go unsold once or twice, or if it does sell, for it to then not complete because someone found out the problem I already knew it was there, couldn't complete on it, and it returns back to the auction at a reduced price. So I take those opportunities and I try and fix those properties and then put them back in a position where actually the wider marketplace can enjoy them, take it, and then put a builder in there and paint something or do what they want to do, which is perfectly fine, not my skill set. Permitted developments, like I used in that case study in the talk at the beginning, it's something that we have been looking at for quite some time, and I've done a couple of bits on PD. Obviously, the most recent one is really very exciting for us. But do we get permitted development in place before we buy it? You know, we wouldn't do that. We, especially at auction, don't have 2 months to play with, and you don't have ownership of the site anyway. So what we have to do is we have to be looking at the price point. So we normally go in, and it's quite funny. We do a coffee morning where we just talk property and stuff like that. every time everyone's like, I say, what do you think this will sell for? Me and Piotr always come up with a price, and we're always wrong. And everyone's like, you call yourself experts. And we're like, no, we wouldn't pay that money for it. Not because the money that someone else paid for it is wrong. It's just that for all of our exits to work, we have to sit within this price bracket, and that price bracket can only be £5,000 or £10,000 thick, right? You never go in with it has to be this exact price, especially at auction. So for me, the value add is knowing what your price point is, knowing the varying levels at which you can add value, and knowing that at the point that you purchase, because that's how you make your, that's when I talk about how you make your money at the price. It's not just going in 50% below market value. It helps. It's not just about that. It's about knowing how you're adding that value and how you're exiting. There are so many people that go into property transactions. I mean, I used to work for an auction company on their contracts desk, and I asked every single human being that I did a contract for, what are your plans for this property? And of all the 3-bedroom semi-detached or mid-terrace houses that came across, I'm a HMO investor. Well, whoop-de-doo, isn't that brilliant? Well, what happens if you can't get a license on this HMO? What happens if Plan A fails? And the reason you paid for this property 60 grand more than anyone else was ever going to pay for it is because you were hoping to turn it into a yielding beast of a machine, where actually the yield would wipe the face in terms of evaluation of what that property is worth anyway. If you can't use that as an HMO, guess what? It's a 3-bedroom mid-terrace house that you overpaid for. What was your plan B? The truth is you didn't have a plan B. And that's what's dangerous. And really where I find that I add the extra value in a deal, and where I make the value at the point of purchase, is I know at least 4 to 5 exits. That's 4 to 5 different uses, 4 to 5 different strategies I can apply to that singular property. For instance, the conversation myself and Andrew are having privately about this property that's going up for auction tomorrow, where I know that any exit point or any pain point that's hit along the way, I can still exit at value. And that's all I'm ever looking to do. If I'm buying 30 properties, if I exit 25 of them without losing a single penny and then make money on 5, I've won. Actually, even if I break even on 20, lose money on 5 and make money on 5, I've still won. And that's how I, as a trader, a value add trader, kind of works and operates. But permitted development is very exciting. I've been talking, I think if you probably replay the video from the gardens when I had my chat, I was espousing the level of craziness I think permitted development is going to go through. And I've been eagerly waiting since 2016 for the air rights permitted developments. Eagerly, I mean, thank God I didn't hold my breath. But you know, between Brexit and COVID-19, it's just dragged it out massively. But it's one of the reasons why I've been looking at buying freehold ground rents. You know, over blocks of flats, over a certain size, because over a certain number of floors, you know, they've dug footings deep enough for you to put an extra floor or 2 on top. If it's below a certain amount of floors, you're going to have to put concrete piling in, and all of a sudden it goes from being a tangible, decent deal to something you have to put £150,000 into just to make sure you can actually put an additional floor on. Very important stuff. But yeah, that's where I sit. That's a good question. Thanks, David.
Perfect. Well, I mean, we've had some thanks for having the right values with regards to working with investors. It's really good that that resonates with the audience, because, well, I don't think anybody would be on here if it didn't resonate with them, because it's the right thing to do, full stop. No 2 ways about it. I mean, looking through the questions here, the only other thing, and David, I'll throw this one to you, that's come from one of the followers, is any tips on how you would go about direct to vendor? Now, I know we've done a video on this on the channel, which was in the A to Z of property strategy, so there's some detail in there. And Jay also mentioned about his talk and raving about the permitted developments at the talk at the Dunchurch Park Hotel. That's also live on the YouTube channel, so if you scroll through the other videos, you'll find those. But any quick, short tips that we can give before we wrap for the evening?
Okay. And before I start, also on that thing, there's an excellent video from you, isn't there, about negotiating 101. And so, so you know, those 3 combined will tell us all the answers. But the short thing really is to, when I'm trying to work with a vendor, which I do regularly, I like to get to know them, and I like to get to know what it is that they want, and then find a way to give it to them, and then to try to see if there's a way that can work for me. And that's why I'm going to get the deals, and that's why my offer won't always be the highest one. But if they want to send little Jimmy to school, then at our second meeting I'll say, hey, here's some brochures, I hear this school's good, and I've done some work on that, and I'll say, little Jimmy could start in September, and this is not kind of it's not enticing them or leading them on. You're actually showing people a way in which their dreams can be fulfilled. Or if it's probate and there's 2 or 3 siblings they quarreling, and you might be the only go-between, you have to go around all of them and do this negotiating and try to make sure that everybody, and very often these things fall out of bed because like 2 will play ball and 1 won't, or something like this, but you've got to try and make it work for everybody. It won't work every single time, but the people you're dealing with will remember, hey, Dave's an honest guy, he really tried to help them. They'll recommend you to their friends and this kind of thing, and it builds up a sort of network, and it gains momentum. So try and make people's dreams come true.
Yeah. Well, there's a great video with a lot more detail on in the A to Z of property strategies. So if you jump on there, you'll actually find a lot more detail where David and I both explore the subject at some length. But what I'd like to do now is thank our 2 esteemed VIP guests here. It's been phenomenal having you share how you were preparing to exit and where you are positioning yourself to capitalize on the opportunities. And a very rare guest appearance from a mystery guest, myself, on this occasion, to actually share what I'm doing and where I believe the market is going, which I think dovetails very neatly with your 2 views without us even collaborating on that. That's the beauty of having a panel of 3 people who are experts in their respective fields and pushing them together. So thank you very much, Jay. It's been brilliant. If you haven't got Jay's book, it's an awesome book, Before the Hammer Falls. Tells you everything you need to know at auctions. If you subscribe to Property Investor News, I believe they also provide those as well, don't they, Jay?
Yeah, so if you sign up for a Property Investor News membership, you'll get one for free. But if you're at an event where they are, which isn't for now, but when events do kick back off again, you can buy one from them if you're already a member at a discounted price. Likewise, if you take a membership for Essential Information Group, the auctioneer's right move, they will send you out for your membership, which I think is £500 or £600 a year. They will also send you out a free copy. On top of that, we're looking at doing second edition to the book. So we're now offering the book free if people just pay their postage, and we're sending the book out to people for that as well. So there are a myriad of different ways to access the book, all of them either which are free or massively discounted from the $14 or $15.99 they've been selling at Amazon for.
And you will get, I mean, it doesn't actually have a price on the back of the book, but you will get more than your value's worth out of this book. It's a huge added value. And I can't give you a bigger plug than that because I think it's a phenomenal book. And the bonus sections at the back were brilliant. I love them.
If you only buy the book to read the last 3 chapters, then that's the book's value is in minimum in those 3 chapters. But
it absolutely is. Absolutely is. I loved it.
Yeah. I've got my copy as well. So kind of we all 3 of us love that book. And I went to Jay's auction workshop because I liked the book so much, and that was terrific as well.
Thanks, David. It was a complete surprise to see you there. I mean, the time I saw David before that, he was speaking at the auction company I used to work for holds like a pre-auction event, and I recommended David to speak about property cycles because a couple of years previous I was on a panel with David at an event which is no longer running, and just thoroughly impressed by him. So it's just been great and we've started talking a bit more now. So I've just thoroughly enjoyed just being around good property people.
Likewise.
And I'd like to say a massive thank you to David for joining us as well tonight. David is a really brilliant chap, a phenomenal fountain of knowledge on all subjects of property. And we also make some brilliant videos on the A to Z of property strategies. We also do a live every week or two as well that you'll follow on this channel. But the knowledge that comes out of David, I am always in awe. And we decided normal backdrops are a bit boring. So we spiced up our backdrops in the videos, didn't we? We've been in prehistoric times with the dinosaurs. We've been touring the world in exotic islands in Paris. We've gone to movie sets and zombies. We've got another movie set coming up this week. I shan't tell you what happens as all the deck chairs on the deck go.
But Leonardo DiCaprio is not involved on that one.
But they're absolutely great fun. And David is phenomenal to make these with. And if you haven't watched any of them, I urge you to watch them just for the entertainment value that's there, if not the fountain of knowledge that comes from David. And I contribute a little as well.
They're a huge lot of fun to make. Huge lot of fun to make.
They are. So thank you, Jay. Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the YouTube live stream. And it's been great fun to be here. And I hope everybody's had a lot of value. We shall see you again same time next month, third Monday of the month. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you've not already subscribed, and you will see some of the feeds that are coming out. And I've got some really interesting, unique content that you won't find on other channels coming up. And look forward to seeing you then. Stay well, stay safe. There you go. Right.